You can now take a hike in the water of beautiful Lake Tahoe. California state parks have developed Tahoe's first underwater trail. It's called the Emerald Bay State Park Maritime Heritage Trail. And it includes 4 different sites showcasing sunken historic boats.
As the water levels dropped in Lake Tahoe, divers found something terrifying at the bottom of America's clearest lake. The 2024 drought, the worst in 1,200 years, pulled the waterline down 9 feet and exposed things along the shore that nobody was supposed to see.
Yeah, because Lake Tahoe is so big, the level moves up and down a lot more slowly than lakes like Folsom and Shasta. But now Tahoe is already at its lowest level in 4 years, and it's still headed down.
Lake Tahoe has always looked impossibly clean from the surface. The water reflects the mountains like polished glass, and tourists describe it as one of the purest places in America. But the deeper researchers looked into the lake, the more they realized that Tahoe's beauty was hiding something much darker beneath it. In 2024, a severe drought caused the lake's waterline to drop dramatically, exposing stretches of shoreline that had been underwater for decades. At first, the discovery seemed ordinary. Old bottles, rusted scraps of metal, abandoned debris tangled in the rocks. But divers quickly realized the lake was revealing pieces of a much larger secret. To understand why Lake Tahoe became the perfect place to hide things, researchers had to understand the lake itself. Tahoe is not an ordinary lake. Sitting more than 6,000 feet above sea level, it plunges nearly 1,645 feet into the earth, making it one of the deepest lakes in the United States. The water remains near freezing year-round, and almost no biological activity exists in the deepest regions. That combination creates something terrifyingly unique. The deeper the water gets, the darker and colder it becomes, until sunlight disappears entirely. Down there, the pressure is immense, the temperature barely changes, and the silence feels absolute. Objects that sink.
The real story began after World War II, when Lake Tahoe transformed almost overnight from an isolated mountain lake into one of the fastest growing resort regions in the western United States. Before the war, reaching Tahoe was difficult. Roads were dangerous, winters were brutal, and only a small number of wealthy visitors traveled there regularly. But after the war ended, everything changed. Soldiers who had trained near the Sierra Nevada returned home remembering the beauty of the lake, and suddenly thousands of people wanted to build homes, hotels, casinos, and businesses around it. Construction exploded across the region, faster than regulations could keep up. Entire communities appeared in only a few years. Bulldozers carved roads into the mountains, while casinos lit up the Nevada shoreline with neon reflections stretching across the water at night. Trucks moved constantly through the region, carrying lumber, machinery, fuel, chemicals, and industrial equipment to support the boom. But with rapid growth came an enormous problem nobody wanted to deal with: waste. Construction debris piled up everywhere. Businesses servicing the casinos generated chemicals and toxic runoff. Old vehicles, industrial materials, and hazardous substances needed disposal, but proper environmental systems barely existed during the 1950s. And Lake Tahoe was right there. Vast, deep, seemingly endless.
For decades, the dumping remained hidden because Lake Tahoe's surface never visibly changed. The water still looked crystal clear. Tourists still arrived every summer believing they were visiting untouched wilderness. But the 2024 drought disrupted that illusion in ways nobody expected. As water levels dropped lower and lower, newly exposed shoreline areas revealed objects that had not been seen in generations. Hikers began spotting strange debris embedded in the rocks. Divers exploring the shallows started finding tires, twisted metal, and heavily corroded machinery. At first, it looked like ordinary litter left behind over time. Then the discoveries became far stranger.
Divers from the nonprofit Clean Up the Lake began uncovering entire vehicles submerged near old roads and access points. Not wrecked beyond recognition, but preserved. Cars from the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s sat on the lake floor in eerie condition, as if they had only recently entered the water. Dive lights swept across faded paint, intact dashboards, readable license plates, and chrome details still reflecting light beneath the water. Some vehicles looked so preserved that divers instinctively checked the windows as though someone might still be sitting inside. One recovered registration traced back to a vehicle that had never officially been reported stolen or missing. It had simply disappeared into the lake decades earlier and remained there untouched ever since. But even those preserved cars turned out not to be the most disturbing thing hidden beneath Tahoe. Because underneath many of the vehicles, researchers were beginning to notice something far more unsettling, buried deeper in the darkness.
As researchers pushed farther from the shoreline, the operation quickly became too dangerous for scuba divers alone. The deepest parts of Lake Tahoe are cold enough to kill an unprotected diver within minutes, and below certain depths, the pressure becomes impossible for humans to safely endure. That was when researchers brought in remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, equipped with cameras and powerful lights capable of descending into the deepest parts of the basin. The footage changed everything. As the ROVs descended below 1,000 feet, sunlight disappeared completely. The cameras drifted through freezing black water, illuminated only by narrow beams cutting through the darkness. The deeper the machines traveled, the more the lake began to resemble an underwater graveyard. At first, the cameras captured more debris, vehicles, machinery, scattered metal fragments. But then the operators noticed something unusual resting across the lake floor in large clusters, cylindrical shapes, industrial barrels. As the ROV lights moved across the basin, more barrels appeared behind them, then more beyond those, row after row stretching into dark.
The situation became far more serious when researchers discovered that some of the barrels were no longer sealed. At depths approaching 1,600 feet, the ROV cameras captured faint plumes drifting slowly from ruptured containers resting on the lake floor. In the freezing water, the leaking material did not disperse quickly. Clouds of contamination hung suspended in the darkness like smoke trapped underwater, spreading slowly through the basin while the ROV lights illuminated the drifting particles. Water samples were collected near the leaking drums and sent to laboratories for analysis. The results stunned researchers. The samples contained dangerous concentrations of heavy metals, including lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic, along with industrial solvents banned decades earlier due to their toxicity. Scientists pieced together a timeline connecting the contamination to Tahoe's rapid development period between the late 1940s and the mid-1960s. The chemicals matched industries operating around the lake during the casino and construction boom: automotive repair shops, industrial laundries, paint manufacturers, metal processing operations, and hotel service facilities. For decades, everyone assumed the contamination was safely trapped at the bottom of the lake, but new data suggested something terrifying. Trace amounts of those same heavy metals were beginning to appear at shallower depths, closer to the layers where people swim, fish, and draw drinking water. Families visiting Tahoe still saw clear blue water sparkling beneath the sun, unaware that deep below them, toxic substances dumped generations earlier were slowly migrating upward through the lake itself. The pristine image of Lake Tahoe had survived for decades because the contamination remained hidden. But now researchers understood the truth. The lake had never been as untouched as people believed.
As disturbing as the toxic waste discoveries were, the deepest ROV footage revealed something even more unsettling. Among the industrial debris and submerged vehicles, operators began noticing objects that did not fit the pattern of ordinary dumping. Pieces of luggage appeared resting on the lake floor. Clothing remnants drifted partially buried in sediment.
personal belongings sat isolated in places where they should not have been. Then came reports from operators describing shapes in the darkness that looked disturbingly human. Lake Tahoe has long been surrounded by rumors involving organized crime activity during the casino boom years. During the 1950s through the 1970s, the Tahoe-Reno corridor became closely tied to mob operations connected to gambling, money laundering, and territorial disputes. Local legends claimed bodies had been dumped into the lake because its depth and cold temperatures would prevent discovery forever. According to individuals familiar with portions of the withheld footage, the ROVs encountered preserved remains resting near some of the debris fields deep within the basin. The cold water had slowed decomposition so dramatically that the bodies were reportedly not reduced to skeletons. Authorities have not publicly released the footage, but federal investigators and local law enforcement agencies reportedly began reviewing portions of the recordings after the discoveries were documented. Several researchers who viewed the material described struggling emotionally after the surveys. What made the reports especially disturbing was the realization that some of these remains may have rested hidden beneath the lake for more than half a century, preserved silently by the same environmental conditions that protected the barrels and vehicles.
The discoveries forced officials, scientists, and residents into an impossible debate. Everyone agreed that the contamination posed a serious long-term threat to the lake, but nobody agreed on how to deal with it safely. Removing the barrels from the bottom of Lake Tahoe could trigger a disaster of its own. Many of the containers are heavily corroded, and disturbing them might release massive amounts of toxic material into the surrounding water all at once. But leaving them untouched guarantees that the leaks will continue slowly for decades. Researchers found themselves trapped between two dangerous outcomes: raise the barrels and risk immediate contamination, or leave them where they are and allow the pollution to spread gradually through the lake over generations. Meanwhile, the surface of Lake Tahoe remained almost impossibly beautiful. Tourists continued kayaking across crystal clear water, while hidden beneath them sat fields of leaking industrial waste scattered across miles of silent darkness. The human remains created an entirely separate problem. Recovery operations at those depths would require enormous resources, legal investigations, and intense public attention. Families of missing people wanted answers, but reopening decades-old disappearances could expose connections many institutions would rather leave buried. Local economies built around Tahoe's image as a pristine natural paradise now faced a terrifying possibility. The lake's reputation might never fully recover if the public understood what was hidden beneath the surface all along.
Even after everything researchers discovered, Lake Tahoe still looks breathtaking from above. The water remains brilliantly blue, the mountains still reflect perfectly across the surface, and millions of visitors continue arriving each year, believing they are witnessing one of the cleanest lakes in America. But now, there is a second version of Lake Tahoe that exists beneath the tourist image. A hidden Tahoe resting in darkness, 1,600 feet below the surface, where industrial waste, submerged vehicles, and preserved secrets remain scattered across the basin floor. Deep below the sunlight, the water stays near freezing, while fields of corroded barrels continue leaking slowly into the surrounding depths. Cars from the 1950s sit silently in the dark, with dashboards still intact. Objects untouched for generations remain suspended in the cold, as though time itself stopped moving around them. The most unsettling part is that none of this was newly created. The contamination, the dumping, and the hidden remains were already there for decades.